Hello everyone, I hope you are really well. I'm just recording this video thinking that it will be a good way to complement the slides that I'm sharing with you. It's just probably a useful way just to basically share the narrative that I would like to put together for the presentation. I've been thinking about this for quite a few weeks because in 8 minutes, of course, it's really hard to just tackle this topic of the future of international education. But I think I'm just gonna share some very interesting set of data. And my proposal for the presentation, and this is what I'm sharing with you, is to basically look at this topic in 8 minutes, looking at sets of data that really help us just to understand first what's the current status of the international education in Australia. Basically, in order to foresee the future, we need to start with where we at now. Also looking at some metrics that could tell us what could actually be the near future, what could be actually be the next 12 or 18 months ahead for us. And of course, the big one, what we can actually see in the data that help us just to understand and map the distant future. Probably this is just thinking about the next 5, 6, 7, or even 10 years. Okay. So in terms of the present, what I think is very interesting is just to look at this particular chart. I think this chart really shows the experience of the sector in the last few years and where we are. And of course, I'm talking about the number of primary student visa holders, so basically the number of students that we have across all sectors, and how things have changed in the last few years and where we are. So before it was the closing of international borders, we had about 610,000 student visa holders here in Australia. And as expected, and unfortunately, we all know this story, with the closing of borders and the challenges created by COVID, we saw a significant decline that basically reached the bottom in April 2022. But since then, we have seen a very impressive recovery of the international education sector and the number of student visa holders. In fact, it was in June this year when we actually reached the same levels that we had before the pandemic. And that's a remarkable, speedy recovery, and I should say also quite unexpected. If we look back at some of the reports and some of the analysis, basically everybody was expecting, or not everybody, but a lot of people were expecting that we'll reach this number by 2024 or even 2025. And in fact, our analysis of Studymove put that we will reach this in December 2023, which a few years ago it was seen as something very optimistic. But as you can see, even the most optimistic forecasting was wrong. We actually reached this number 6 months ahead of any forecast that we had before. So that's a really, really good recovery. And the recovery continued because if we actually look at the latest figures, we actually are now 4% above the pre-pandemic level. This is basically where we at. We actually accomplished the recovery, and it's time just to move forward. It's interesting just to see that pretty much all sectors have reached this level of recovery, with the except of the school sector, which I'm hopeful, and I think the expectation is that they will also reach back pre-pandemic levels probably by 2024. Okay? So that's where we at. And the big question, of course, that everybody has is like, following this nice trend of recovery, what's next? What's in the near future? What can we expect in the next 12 to probably 18 months? And I believe that the best metric just to look at this, the best leading indicator, is the number of student visas lodged. Basically, this is telling us the number of students who already accept an offer and they're in the process of lodging visas. And we look carefully at this metric, and we look at, semester versus semester, month by month, comparing different periods, quarter by quarter. And in general, in pretty much any comparison that you make nowadays, the number of student visas lodged, and what you see on the screen is just the amount of visas lodged in the first half of the year, which most likely a lot of them actually will go for the second half of the year, and some of them even for 2014. But as you can see, it has been an impressive surge in the number of student visas lodged. This gives them some reassurance that in the second half of 2023, we'll continue to see a growth in numbers if the grant rates continue to be the same, which I don't see why it wouldn't. And most likely, this trend will continue in 2024. This is the data for all sectors. And as I said, you can actually see this month by month, quarter by quarter. And in general, this is the trend. We are about 20 to 30% above pre-pandemic levels. What is interesting about this is a couple of things. First, I think we just need to understand that this bounce back may not continue. I think that as we progress in 2024, 2025, we'll continue to see some growth, but it's not going to be as spectacular as what we have experienced. It's most likely going to go back to normal levels, which is about one-digit growth of about 5, 6%, even 9% for some education providers. So it's important just to see that, or to think that this will normalize in the next few years. The other interesting thing, thinking about the near future, is how things have changed in terms of the engagement with the top market for Australia. And what is interesting is to see that it has been a slight change in the top markets. But what is more interesting is just to see where is the source of growth. What you see on the screen now is the number of commencements that we had from January to June this year. And as you can see, these are the top markets for Australia for higher education. The main sources of growth, all markets actually are tracking really well, but the big growth is coming from countries in South Asia. As you can see, India with more than 100% growth in comparison to last year, Pakistan 200%, and you can see that in the table. So we actually engaging quite actively with applicants for this particular region. And what I think is quite interesting is, of course, that there's a shift on the focus in the market, but also is the nature of these markets, because we know that these markets are basically with the students who have a greater drive or a greater motivation to come to Australia for employability reasons. And also there are markets that have a larger number of mature age students. That's the other thing that we notice in the visas trends for the last probably 12 or to 18 months. We're actually engaging more with mature age students. In fact, for the first time, the larger number of mature of students getting visas are actually students who are above 25 years old, which is basically mature age students. So we might see that employability takes a more important role in the next few years, but that's something that we still need time just to see if that's the case. Now, moving into the big one, which is, of course, looking at data that can give us an understanding of what we can expect in the distant future. I believe that the best resource and the best analysis that exists at the moment is actually the analysis done by Navitas. This is a very, very thorough analysis of how the international education will actually move, not only for Australia, but worldwide. And the big, I think, highlight and the result provided by this analysis from Navitas is the fact that it's expected that in the next 10 years, the demand for international education will continue. Not at the growth that we have seen in the past, but it will continue. And by 2030, we'll have 9.1 million students looking for international education experiences, which is significant. What I think is quite relevant about this analysis is how this could actually reshape the international education sector. And I think that what is important is just to try to understand the level of how this continuous demand could affect the experience and the strategies that education providers are actually taking to engage with international applicants. And what I'm trying just to raise here is something that I think is important just to consider for the next 10 years is, are we going to reach a limit in how many students education providers can actually service with an on-campus experience? If you think about, let's say, a university that currently has 10,000 international students, which we have quite a few of those here in Australia, by 2030, this university will have more than 14,000. So I think that some institutions will be able probably to cater for that increase in the demand, but it could be some of them that basically will start reaching the limit. And this is when we may see that basically other delivery modes will actually take a more important role. And of course, I'm thinking that some education providers will actually be considering even more so the engagement through transnational education models and of course online learning. I think this is something that we might see in the next 10 years. Of course, when you think about the distant future, you just can start probably mapping certain scenarios. But what is interesting is just to see that the data is suggesting that the demand will continue. So what is interesting is just to see how education providers will react to that continuous increase in the demand for the next 10 years. Now, what we know at this stage is, and this is the job that we have recently done through AUIDF, is that about 84% of the students who participate, of the universities who participate in our AUIDF benchmark this year, basically say that 84 are considering to increase TNE for next year. What I think is quite interesting is the next one. Only 30% are actually thinking about online. I think there is still a lot of conversations happening about online. Not everybody is as obviously keen to engage in this model as what we have seen with transnational, but it would be great just to hear from everybody their views on this area in particular. So I hope that these few data sets will help to put some additional perspectives in the conversations that we'll have on the session. Is very excited just to see everybody in Adelaide. I look forward just to hear your feedback. If you think that anything that we need to change or anything that we could add. But yeah, I think it's going to be very exciting just to tackle this big topic of the future of international education. Thank you so much for the invitation and look forward to hearing from you. Take care. See you. Bye.